For years, many Americans watched Charlie Kirk build a public life rooted in faith, family, and conservative values. As the founder of Turning Point USA, he spoke often about marriage, leadership, and responsibility. He presented himself as a man guided by conviction, structured by discipline, and anchored by belief. To supporters, he symbolized steadiness in an era of cultural turbulence. But now, after his sudden death, a very different narrative is beginning to surface. And it raises a difficult question for those of us who have seen enough headlines come and go. When the cameras are off, what's really happening behind closed doors? Recently, Charlie's sister Mary stepped forward with a claim that intensified public scrutiny. According to her, a Valentine's Day letter posted by Erika, presented as Charlie's final love note, may not have been written by him at all. That accusation alone would be enough to stir debate. But in the broader context of everything surrounding this story, it has sparked something deeper than debate. It has sparked doubt. If you saw the letter, you may have experienced the same reaction others described. The handwriting looked uneven, almost hurried. The lowercase letters were nearly identical in size to the uppercase ones. The spacing fluctuated unpredictably. Words were cramped in certain lines and stretched awkwardly in others. There were grammatical errors that seemed out of character for a man known for meticulously crafted speeches and carefully worded public statements. So we have to ask, does this resemble the writing of someone who built a career on precision in language? Or does it look like something assembled for emotional impact rather than authenticity? The content of the letter didn't quiet the questions either. It was filled with glowing praise, calling Erika an amazing and talented mother, expressing adoration beyond words, and describing a future overflowing with shared adventures. On the surface, it sounded affectionate, warm, devoted. Yet some observers described an unusual contrast. The tone felt polished and almost performative, while the execution, the handwriting, the phrasing inconsistencies, felt careless. As if the message was carefully curated, but the medium was not. Almost as if perception mattered more than proof. Then there was Erika's caption accompanying the post, reminding followers to honor the Sabbath with loved ones. A thoughtful spiritual reminder. Entirely consistent with the couple's public faith identity. But what did it have to do with the letter itself? Why blend a private romantic gesture with a broader religious instruction? Was it a sincere reflection of shared belief, or a reinforcement of brand alignment during a sensitive moment? These are not verdicts. They are questions. And questions matter. Because beyond the letter, additional reports began to circulate. Allegations suggested that Charlie had been contemplating divorce prior to his death. Sources claiming proximity to Mary stated that he had confided in his sisters about serious marital strain. There were whispers that the couple had sold their Arizona home and were living separately. That he had begun sleeping in another room. That he had stopped wearing his wedding ring. If those reports are accurate, they paint a picture dramatically different from the one presented online. Social media showed smiling photos. Conference appearances showed unity. Public remarks referenced partnership and faith. But if separation was quietly underway, then the tone of that Valentine's letter becomes even more puzzling. Would a man preparing to leave his marriage compose such glowing words? Or would he sound conflicted, reserved, ambivalent? Or is it possible that relationships are more layered than the public ever sees? Many in the 40 to 65 age group understand this intimately. You've seen marriages evolve over decades. You know that two realities can exist simultaneously: affection and strain, loyalty and doubt, hope and fatigue. So perhaps the question isn't whether tension existed, but whether the public portrayal matched the private truth. And that distinction matters. Another troubling claim added further fuel to speculation. The allegation that a significant life insurance policy had been taken out on Charlie. Reports indicated that in 2023, premiums of roughly $350,000 per year were paid through an LLC called GGLF. The potential payout was estimated between $20 million and $50 million. That is not a casual policy. Such financial instruments require deliberation, consultation, and intention. They involve accountants, attorneys, documentation. They reflect planning, sometimes prudent, sometimes strategic. An auditor, Brian Ferentz, reportedly reviewed tax filings associated with Turning Point USA and identified the premium payments. Public documents confirmed the existence of the policy structure. What remains undisclosed is the beneficiary. That silence has become its own headline. Again, having a life insurance policy is not evidence of wrongdoing. Many high-profile individuals carry large policies. In leadership roles, especially those involving public visibility, it can be considered responsible financial planning. But when you layer that financial reality beside reports of marital tension, a contested letter, a sudden death, and a swift leadership transition, the timeline invites scrutiny. And scrutiny is not the same as accusation. Consider another element. An insider claimed that Mary never fully embraced Erika into the family. That emotional distance lingered for years. Family tension is hardly uncommon, especially in high-profile marriages where public pressure magnifies every disagreement. But fractured relationships can complicate tragedy. When siblings speak publicly against a surviving spouse, it signals something deeper than casual disagreement. Is it grief expressing itself imperfectly? Or long-standing mistrust finally surfacing? Then there is the matter of succession. Several individuals close to Turning Point USA stated that in the months leading up to Charlie's death, Erika had increasingly stepped into visible leadership roles. She reportedly spoke in meetings, represented initiatives, positioned herself publicly in ways that suggested preparation. Preparation for what? Succession planning is not unusual in organizations. Corporate boards routinely groom replacements. Political movements anticipate transitions. But typically, those processes are transparent and formally acknowledged. When preparation feels informal, quiet, or premature, observers begin asking why. Was Erika simply supporting her husband more actively? Or was she positioning herself for an inevitable shift? Then there was a small but telling moment captured on camera. Charlie casually asked Erika how long they had been married. A simple question. A number most spouses recall instantly. She paused, hesitated, laughed it off, saying there were too many dates to remember. On its own, it's minor. People forget things. Life is busy. Anniversaries can blur together. But for many watching, particularly those who have lived through decades of marriage, that hesitation felt symbolic. Because you don't just remember the date. You remember where you were, who stood beside you, what you felt. So why didn't she? Again, not proof. Just pattern. Patterns are what seasoned observers notice. And for those who have navigated corporate leadership, family businesses, or even church organizations, you understand that power transitions are rarely simple. Emotion and strategy intertwine. Grief and governance overlap. Personal loss intersects with institutional survival. After Charlie's death, Erika stepped into a powerful leadership role with remarkable speed. Supporters framed it as resilience. Critics framed it as opportunism. Which interpretation is correct? Perhaps neither fully captures the truth. Perhaps grief forced urgency. Or perhaps urgency preceded grief. That is the uncomfortable tension at the heart of this story. Handwriting analysts online compared the Valentine's letter with known samples of Charlie's writing. They pointed to inconsistencies in the formation of specific letters, differences in slant, variation in signature style. Some dismissed the analysis as amateur speculation. Others insisted the discrepancies were too significant to ignore. But handwriting is not a static fingerprint. Stress alters penmanship. Physical health can change writing. Emotional states influence pressure and form. So how much deviation is acceptable before doubt becomes justified? And who decides? For many mature viewers, credibility is built on consistency. When public messaging, personal artifacts, and financial decisions align, trust remains stable. When they appear to diverge, skepticism grows. And skepticism is not cynicism. It is caution. Perhaps the most uncomfortable possibility is also the simplest. What if the marriage truly was strained? What if the Valentine's letter, authentic or not, represented an attempt to preserve a public image during private turmoil? Marriages falter. Ambition strains intimacy. Public life magnifies ordinary conflict. None of that would make either party inherently villainous. But when a narrative of perfection persists while insiders describe fracture, trust erodes. Trust, once shaken, is difficult to restore. So where does this leave us? With unresolved threads. Valentine's letter whose authenticity is questioned. Reports of marital separation and emotional distance. A substantial life insurance policy with undisclosed beneficiary details. A rapid leadership transition following sudden death. A sister publicly challenging the official narrative. Individually, each element could be explained. Together they create complexity. And complexity demands patience. In an era of instant conclusions and viral outrage, maturity requires something different. It requires restraint. It requires the ability to sit with uncertainty, to resist the temptation of tidy explanations. Ask yourself this: when a powerful public figure dies under shocking circumstances, what do we truly know, and what are we simply told? Who controls the narrative in the first 72 hours? Who benefits from clarity? Who benefits from confusion? History offers examples of public stories later revised. Of widows both unfairly accused and legitimately scrutinized. Of siblings who were either prophetic or petty. Of financial arrangements that were prudent, and others that were manipulative. Discernment lies in withholding judgment until facts settle. But discernment also means refusing blind acceptance. For those who have lived long enough to witness reputations built and dismantled, you understand that truth often surfaces slowly. It arrives not in dramatic revelations but in quiet confirmations. Maybe more documents will emerge. Maybe legal clarifications will settle speculation. Maybe family reconciliation will provide perspective. Or maybe ambiguity will linger. If the Valentine's letter was authentic, transparency could restore confidence. If it was not, honesty would ultimately serve better than denial. Because integrity isn't built through perfectly timed social media posts. It's built through alignment between word and action, private reality and public presentation. So perhaps the deeper issue isn't about handwriting at all. It's about congruence. Does the story we are shown match the life that was lived? And what standard should we apply to public leaders in moments of tragedy? Should we accept the presented narrative at face value? Or calmly examine it, piece by piece, without malice but without naivety? In your own experience, have you ever discovered that the public story didn't align with private truth? What did that teach you about perception? About loyalty? About caution? This story may continue to unfold. Allegations may be clarified or dismissed. Documents may confirm or contradict assumptions. Until then, perhaps the wisest posture is thoughtful observation. Ask questions. Evaluate evidence. Avoid extremes. Because beyond politics and personality, what most people at this stage of life value is integrity. And integrity is rarely loud. It is steady, consistent, transparent, especially when circumstances are painful and public. So as this situation develops, the real issue isn't simply whether a letter was authentic. It's whether the full story, whatever it ultimately proves to be, will be told honestly. And in a world saturated with curated images and carefully crafted narratives, that may be the question that matters most. When the headlines fade, when the speeches end, when the spotlight dims, what remains? Truth does. And truth, however slow, has a way of finding daylight. Charlie had always been a figure who occupied two rooms at once. The room of private life, with its small, idiosyncratic rituals, and the room of public consequence, where every handshake and spreadsheet echoed beyond the boardroom. That dual existence is why the simplest detail, an LLC dissolved 3 days before his death, feels like a splinter that refuses to come free. It slides under the nail of common sense and there it aches. The timeline, when laid out, seems almost mechanical in its cruelty. In mid-2024, a payment of $350,000 flowed from Turning Point into an LLC. That money, on paper, was used to fund premiums for a split-dollar life insurance policy. An arrangement where an organization pays premiums and later recoups its outlay, and a designated beneficiary receives what remains. It's sophisticated tax and estate planning dressed in corporate language. It's also a structure that demands documentation. Board minutes, resolutions, signatures, fiduciary sign-offs. 3 days before Charlie was assassinated, that LLC was dissolved. 3 days is a sliver of time. It is also, in stories, the width of a razor. Is that coincidence? Or is it the kind of timing that pulls at the seams of ordinary explanation? The facts the public knows are lean. They leave room for reconstruction, for the mind to fill in motives, for journalists to push on doors that remain shut. And when doors are shut, rumors become the furniture of conversation. They sit in corners, they snag on clothing, and they change the way a house is described. To expand this into a fuller picture, to make the stakes palpable rather than abstract, it helps to step back and imagine the textures around the central facts. The late nights in the office, the quiet rituals at home, the corporate committees that sign off on financial instruments, the small domestic tensions that go unspoken until they become, in retrospect, significant. Picture the boardroom where the split-dollar policy was discussed. The room is long. The table is polished to a mirror sheen. Legal counsel sits at one end, a counsel who has seen enough estate plans to read them by scent. Accountants have spreadsheets open, columns of numbers that, if you let them, begin to seem almost moral in their neutrality. A CFO explains the logic: liquidity at death, estate tax efficiency, ensuring that the company's interests are protected should executive succession become messy. On paper, the plan is defensible. It is also, by nature, transactional. Now picture the house, where a different set of mechanics govern life. Private rituals. Favorite chairs. The place where Charlie might have kept a small leather notebook with names and dates. Where a sister who never warmed to Erika visited infrequently and left quickly. In the public view, those private objects are invisible. Yet it is within their margins that motive and memory are forged. When people say spouses are often beneficiaries, they speak from a place of pattern recognition. It is routine for a spouse to collect proceeds from a life policy. But the public imagination balks when spouses are beneficiaries of policies paid for by corporate actors, when the corporate actor disappears, and when the beneficiary steps quickly into a leadership position. Those are not, in themselves, crimes. They are, however, narrative accelerants. We must be careful to keep clear what is known and what is suspected. The legal structure of a split-dollar policy is not nefarious by default. Wealthy households and their advisors use similar tools to ensure that a business continues, that taxes are managed, or that a family's liquidity needs are met upon the death of a principal. In many instances, such policies exist precisely to prevent chaos. The devil, for public concern, lies in context. In whether the policy was the product of transparent corporate governance, whether signatures and approvals existed, and whether the person whose life is insured understood what had been placed in motion. So we ask, did Charlie sign documents knowingly? Were there moments when a dissenting voice, a compliance officer, a board member, an external auditor, raised concerns? Or was this the kind of apparatus that can be executed by others with power of attorney, corporate authority, or the deference of proximity? Those are not idle questions. They point to a structural issue. In environments where authority flows through a handful of trusted people, documentation becomes the guardrail. It prevents misinterpretation, abuse, and the slow accretion of questionable decisions. When documentation is absent, people begin to ask different kinds of questions. Were there verbal approvals? Were signatures sticky with coercion or flattery? Did a sense of inevitability, the "of course we should" thinking, override cautious process? Public perception also moves on social cues. After Charlie's assassination, certain images of Erika began to circulate. Social media posts taken as cheerful or celebratory, a gathering marked by fireworks, a letter that some described as awkward in tone. Human responses to grief vary widely. They always have. Some people go inward and disappear from public life, their grief folded tight. Others, perhaps uncomfortably, do not know how to sit with sorrow and instead find motion, public appearances, statements, or spectacles, as a substitute. But the optics were not merely about taste. They were a series of small decisions that, to many observers, presented as tone-deaf at best and opportunistic at worst. Combine those optics with the financial oddities, the LLC dissolution, the existing policy structure, the transfer from an organizational funder, and the public's inclination to find a pattern feels almost inevitable. Narrative wants cohesion. It wants an explanation that ties the domestic to the financial to the political. The temptation to connect dots is strong. But good reporting resists the siren song of neatness. It demands, instead, patient work, subpoenas, signatures, timestamps. How many signatures? Where are the board minutes? Who authorized the dissolution of the LLC and on what legal basis? These procedural facts matter more than gossip. And yet, even procedural facts, when revealed slowly, do not always soothe the larger human question. Why did this family, and this business, arrive at this crossroads? What interpersonal dynamics were at play? We can imagine scenes that give texture to those dynamics. We can imagine a dinner where disagreements are undercut by laughter and quickly buried. We can imagine a kitchen where whispers of divorce are first spoken into the safe dark of night. We can imagine a sister watching from the periphery, her distance not simply personal but imposed by a history of differences, a distance that now looks to onlookers like prescience. Erika's step into leadership, whether abrupt or gradual, is a key hinge. For some, that step read as continuity. The business needs a leader and she had been deeply involved. For others, it felt opportunistic, a partner assuming power at a moment when accountability would be hardest to demand. Here's a question to consider. When the private becomes public, how much should the public expect to know? If you have been a shareholder, you know that transparency is currency. If you are a family member, privacy is a sanctuary. When a person and a corporation are interwoven, whose priority wins? It is a question that sits at the heart of many disputes involving wealth. There are practical, bureaucratic threads deserving scrutiny. Who in Turning Point signed off on the payment? Was the payment labeled as premium funding, loan, or other? Were tax implications fully analyzed? Was the rationale sticky and documented, e.g., this policy ensures liquidity for estate taxes and provides security for planned succession? Or was the language vague, allowing for post-facto interpretations? Another question. Why dissolve the LLC 3 days before the death? There are benign reasons businesses close. Administrative simplification, tax planning changes, or restructuring. But in the absence of documentation explaining motive and timing, benign reasons are only one plausible explanation among several. Transparency here is not merely bureaucratic. It is the difference between a public conversation that investigates and one that imagines. We should also examine the human cost. When reputations are pried open, private grief becomes public precedent. A widow or widower, if indeed criticized, faces a double burden, mourning while defending their integrity. The family, especially those who kept their distance, wrestles with the temptation to speak up or remain silent. Silence is a choice often made to preserve privacy, but it can be read as evasiveness. Which leads to another question. If you were advising a high-profile figure in Charlie's position, what would you insist on before allowing any corporate instrument that materially affects your estate? Independent counsel? Multiple signatories? A transparent, recorded board vote? These aren't academic exercises. They're the guardrails between perception and reality. And if you were advising someone thrust into leadership under these clouds, as Erika was, how would you proceed? Immediate transparency? A voluntary audit? Public town halls with stakeholders? Often, the fastest way to rebuild trust is openness. Publish the documents you can, consent to independent review, and explain not just what was done but why it was believed to be appropriate. Trust doesn't return because you ask for it. It returns because you make the work visible and verifiable. Another dimension often overlooked in the rush to attribute motive is the psychological. What does it feel like to be close to immense wealth and to be subject to constant suspicion? For leaders and spouses alike, power is isolating. Paranoia can grow in the hollow spaces where privacy once lived. Decisions that seem reasonable internally can look rationalized externally. The emotional subtext matters because it shapes actions. Hurried decisions, defensive legal structures, or attempts to preempt conflict. That doesn't excuse shady behavior. It helps explain how rational people sometimes end up in situations that look, to outsiders, unethical or at least morally ambiguous. It also reframes the responsibility. Institutional processes, not personalities alone, guard against missteps. If those processes are bypassed, intentional or not, the system fails. So what are the practical steps forward for investigators, family members, and the public? First, document collection. Insurance contracts, board minutes, correspondence, and dissolution documents for the LLC must be reviewed. Second, interviews. Who in Turning Point handled the transfer? Was there a written investment or funding agreement? Third, for families, consider mediation or independent accounting to ensure that whatever fiduciary duty existed was observed. But let us also return to the human questions that started this piece. If you were in Charlie's position, what safeguards would you place on your life and legacy? Many wealthy people prioritize immutability. Multi-signer documents, unchangeable trust provisions, transparent beneficiary designations, independent trustees. They also realize that wealth complicates intimacy. They work to create structures that protect both assets and relationships. If you were in Erika's place, how would you restore trust amid suspicion? The quickest path is often to invite external verification, third-party audits, voluntary disclosures, and an earnest effort to make processes public. Trust is not a thing one takes. It is one that is earned back, step by documented step. Finally, and this is the question that lingers most insistently, what is the most critical unanswered question here? Is it the precise reason for the LLC's dissolution 3 days before the assassination? Is it the chain of approvals for the insurance policy? Or is it the deeper question of how families and institutions should navigate the meeting point of intimacy and influence? The answer you find most compelling reveals something about your values. If you prioritize procedural fairness, you will insist on paperwork and signatures. If you prioritize relational ethics, you will want to know about conversations, intent, and the way people treated one another behind closed doors. Both perspectives matter. Both are necessary for a full account. Stories like this do more than invite speculation. They compel us to consider how we want power exercised in public life. They ask whether we accept arrangements that privilege opacity or whether we demand that those who govern our institutions answer plainly to those affected by their decisions. At the end of the day, the lesson may be simple and uncomfortable. When money, influence, and human relationships entangle, clarity must be intentionally created and fiercely protected. Otherwise, coincidence looks like conspiracy, and every timing anomaly becomes a narrative weapon. What do you believe is the most essential truth we should seek in this story? The procedural clarity, the personal accountability, or the public transparency? And which of those, in your view, will most effectively cut through suspicion and provide a durable answer?